5 darkest medieval execution methods you won't believe existed. What if I told you that in the Middle Ages, death was never quick, never merciful, and almost never private? Execution was more than punishment, it was theater. A cruel performance meant to terrify the crowd and prove the absolute power of kings, queens, and the church. Forget torture chambers, what came after was even worse. Victims were not simply killed, they were displayed. Some were slowly boiled alive in giant cauldrons, their screams echoing through the streets. Others were sawn in half, blood spilling as the crowd looked on. And some faced punishments so unthinkable they seemed born from nightmares rather than law. These were not accidents of cruelty. They were carefully crafted rituals, designed to control entire populations through fear. To witness such executions was to learn one chilling lesson. No one defied authority and lived to tell the tale. In this video, we'll uncover 5 of the darkest medieval execution methods you won't believe existed. Methods so gruesome, so terrifying, they still haunt history to this day. Execution method number 1. The blood eagle among. The most infamous and spine-chilling execution methods whispered about from the Viking Age into the medieval world is the blood eagle. Whether it was myth, ritual, or brutal reality, the blood eagle remains one of history's most terrifying ways to die. The condemned would be seized, often accused of treachery or betraying a lord. Bound and helpless, their back was cut open with knives, ribs hacked apart with axes, and then pulled outward like the wings of a grotesque eagle. To complete the ritual, the victim's lungs were dragged from the cavity and draped over the shoulders. The idea was not only to kill, but to make the body itself a ghastly symbol of dishonor. But the true horror of the blood eagle lay in its cruelty. Historical accounts suggest that some victims were kept conscious for as long as possible, forced to feel every slash, every breath growing weaker as their lungs collapsed in the cold air. It was not simply execution, it was spectacle, designed to terrify anyone who dared betray a king or a god. Historians debate whether the blood eagle was practiced as described, or whether later writers exaggerated it into legend. Yet whether myth or truth. 8. The image endures. A human body transformed into a monstrous emblem of fear, carved apart under the gaze of a merciless crowd. The blood eagle reminds us that in the medieval imagination, death itself could be twisted into a message, unforgettable to all who watched. Execution method number 2. Boiling alive if you thought burning at the stake was brutal. Imagine a death even slower being boiled alive. In parts of medieval Europe, this gruesome execution was reserved for the worst crimes: treason, poisoning, or murdering nobles. It was not enough to kill the offender. The goal was to make every second of their death a horrifying warning to the crowd. The condemned would be shackled, stripped, and lowered into a massive cauldron filled with water, oil, tar, or even molten lead. Sometimes the liquid was already boiling, searing flesh instantly. Other times the victim was placed in cold water and left to suffer as the heat rose degree by degree. Their screams filled the square, echoing over the jeers of the watching mob. Skin blistered, peeled, and sloughed away, while the smell of burning flesh hung heavy in the air. What made this execution particularly terrifying was its drawn-out nature. Death could take minutes or hours depending on the cruelty of the executioner. It was theater of pain, designed to remind everyone that betrayal and crime would be met not with mercy, but with a fate worse than any nightmare. Historical records note that King Henry VIII of England ordered people boiled alive for poisoning, declaring it a crime most detestable. In that era, such executions weren't just punishment. They were political performance, ensuring obedience through fear. The image of a human body writhing in a boiling cauldron remains one of the darkest stains on medieval justice. The method so horrific that even torture seems merciful by comparison. Execution method number 3, sawing in half. Among the most nightmarish execution methods whispered in medieval chronicles is the sawing in half of punishment that turned death into slow, unbearable torment. Unlike a swift beheading, this execution was meant to drag out suffering for as long as humanly possible. The victim would be hung upside down by their ankles, their head close to the ground. Why? Because this inverted position forced blood to rush to the brain, keeping them conscious far longer than if they were upright. Once suspended, the executioners brought out a heavy two-handed saw. Starting between the victim's legs, they cut downward through flesh, muscle, and bone while the crowd looked on in horrified fascination. At first, the victim remained alive, shrieking as the saw carved through their body. The blood rushing to the head delayed unconsciousness, ensuring maximum agony. Some accounts claim victims stayed aware until the saw reached their abdomen, or even their chest. Each stroke of the blade was deliberate, slow, and merciless, a grim performance staged in marketplaces and public squares. Sawing in half was often used for heretics, rebels, or those accused of heinous crimes against the state or church. But beyond punishing the individual, it carried a deeper message. This is what happens when you defy power. To the medieval mind, justice was not just about death, but about spectacle. And nothing left a more indelible mark of terror than watching a human being sliced apart before your very eyes. Even centuries later, the horror of this method remains almost impossible to comprehend. Execution method number 4, the breaking wheel. If there was ever a device that turned execution into sheer torture, it was the breaking wheel, also known as the wheel of death. Few methods in medieval Europe were as feared, but this was not just an execution, it was the complete destruction of the human body. The condemned was tied to a massive wooden wheel, arms and legs splayed out like a grotesque star. Then came the iron cudgel. With calculated precision, the executioner shattered each limb, bone by bone, first the legs, then the arms. The sound of cracking echoed through the square as the victim howled in agony. To prolong the torment, the blows avoided vital organs, ensuring the condemned remained alive as their body twisted into unnatural shapes. Once broken, the mangled prisoner was often woven through the spokes of the wheel and hoisted high above the crowd. There they would be left to die slowly, sometimes lasting for days, exposed to the sun, rain, and the mocking stares of villagers. Birds pecked at their wounds while the wheel stood as a grim reminder of authority's wrath. The breaking wheel was not only a punishment, but a symbol. It declared that no traitor, no murderer, no rebel would merely die. They would be unmade, their bodies shattered as a warning carved into history. For the medieval mind, the wheel was both justice and theater, and for the victim, it was the ultimate sentence. A death where every moment of suffering was put on display. Execution method number 5, burning at the stake. Few images from the medieval world are as haunting as the sight of a human body consumed by flames. Burning at the stake was not just an execution, it was a ritual of fear, often carried out in the name of religion. Those accused of witchcraft, heresy, or crimes against the church were bound to wooden posts, surrounded by piles of wood, enkindling and sentenced to meet their end in fire. The condemned stood before a crowd, sometimes thousands strong, while priests and officials proclaimed their guilt. Then the torch was lit. The flames licked upward, first searing flesh, then engulfing the entire body. Screams of agony filled the air as smoke curled skyward, carrying with it both the stench of burning flesh and the chilling message of divine judgment. Unlike other executions, burning at the stake was meant to erase not just the body, but the very soul. Fire symbolized purification, and for the church, it was believed to cleanse the sinner's spirit even, as it annihilated their earthly form. Victims might be strangled or suffocated before the flames reached them, but more often, they were left alive to suffer every excruciating second. The burning of Joan of Arc in 1431 remains one of the most infamous examples, a young woman condemned as a heretic, whose death by fire turned her into a martyr. In the medieval imagination, the stake was more than execution. It was theater, spectacle, and warning. For centuries, fire was the church's weapon of fear, a flame that burned into history, leaving behind only ash and terror. From the grotesque blood eagle to the boiling cauldron, from the merciless saw and the breaking wheel to the flames of the stick, each of these execution methods reminds us just how dark and brutal the medieval world could be. These were not simply punishments, but public performances of fear. Every broken bone, every scream, every rising plume of smoke was a lesson to the living: obey or suffer the same fate. And yet, as horrifying as they are to us today, these methods were accepted, even celebrated, as justice in their time. They reveal not only the cruelty of medieval rulers and the church, but also the chilling power of fear to control entire societies. History has left behind these nightmares, but their echoes remain. To remember them is to confront the darkest corners of human imagination, and to ensure that such horrors are never repeated. If you found this journey into the shadows of medieval justice eye-opening, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss our next descent into the secrets of history's darkest past.